All right. Well, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. Forgive me, I'm managing the waiting room here. So happy, so delighted to have so many community members join us with our research team this evening. Thank you. Well, this is super. Welcome, Graton families and community members, farm workers and farmers. Welcome to our research team and the County of Sonoma representatives and leaders who are here with us. This meeting is being recorded and it will be made available for viewing at sonomasass.org. We'll share that later and put it in the chat. Please take a moment as you're joining to ensure that your microphone is on mute so that we can reduce the amount of background noise and be able to hear our speakers. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the chat feature to type your question, or you can hold it until the portion of Q&A. Wonderful. I'm delighted that there's so many of us here. Thank you for joining us from Watsonville. Awesome. Well, fantastic. To begin, I'd like to begin with gratitude, profound gratitude, actually. A community-based research project such as this is only possible because of the will and the willingness of a community to question what's happening, to organize and reach out for support, to advocate for the collective well-being, and engage in scientific inquiry. So our gratitude begins with the community of Graton, California. Many community members are responsible for bringing this research here. And this is the result of many years of advocacy by dedicated and resourceful community members who are concerned about the health impacts of pesticides exposures. Pesticides exposures is a common concern amongst agricultural communities throughout the state of California. And the research done here supports the larger landscape of efforts to understand the health impacts of exposed communities. Many, many thanks to the leaders and participants of Graton Against Synthetic Pesticides, or GASP, and the Sonoma Safe Ag, Safe Schools, SASS Coalition for your organizing efforts to bring this research project to Sonoma County. Your outreach and engagement efforts are greatly appreciated. And if I took the time to individually recognize the many people who've been involved, from teachers to student groups, to county workers, to the average citizen, it truly would take all night just to name names. So we're humbled and grateful. It takes a tremendous community effort, and we have a strong community here. Special thank yous to Jane Sellen at Californians for Pesticide Reform and Dr. Peggy Reynolds at the University of California, San Francisco, for receiving our community's concerns and desires for scientific inquiry and responding with resources and a research team. Thank you to Megan Kahn, the director of SASS, for everything she did to bring this research project here and for continuing to be an inspirational leader. Thank you to the 34 Graton households that volunteered to participate in our research project. And a very special thank you to the selected 6 households that participated in our research project. We definitely couldn't have done this without you, and we're grateful for your time, your attention, and your data. Thank you to our research scientists, Dr. Dana Kolpin and Dr. Michelle Zladek from the United States Geological Survey, for your excellent guidance and answering our many questions along the way. Thank you to our epidemiologist from UC San Francisco, Julie Von Baron, for helping us understand the research in context of our community's health. Thank you to Jayla Burton and Halima Atobaloif from Breast Cancer Action for your support and your advocacy. Thank you to the County of Sonoma, to the 5th District Supervisor Linda Hopkins, to the District Director Leo Chi, and to all the county staff who've helped us along the way. Thank you to the County of Sonoma, the Departments of Public Health, Environmental Health, and the Agricultural Commission's Office for your resources and support. And lastly, special thanks to our funder, the California Breast Cancer Research Program. There is so much to be grateful for. Thank you all for joining us this evening as we discuss the results of the Graton Pesticides Research Project. My name is Nicole Warwick, and I'm a co-principal investigator for the Graton Pesticides Research Project. I'm also a co-founder and co-chair of the board of directors at Sonoma Safe Ag, Safe Schools. My role in this research has been to facilitate community engagement and outreach, to research the sites and pesticide use reports, to conduct the field samplings, to develop the research results pamphlet, and to serve as a liaison between the community and our research team. And now I'd like to invite my fellow researchers to introduce themselves, beginning with Jane Sellen.
Thanks, Nicole, for that beautiful introduction to our study. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Jane Sellen. I'm co-director of the statewide coalition Californians for Pesticide Reform. And just by way of introduction to the study, just wanted to say a little bit about how it came to be. I'll start with my own partnership with Dr. Peggy Reynolds, who's our research partner on this project. We were partners on a prior project with the same funder looking at breast cancer incidence and connections to legacy gold mining activities in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And when we were looking to develop a pesticide related project that might examine links between pesticide exposure and breast cancer, of course, thought of Peggy first. So really delighted that she was interested in jumping on again and joining our team. So we reached out to Megan, who at the time was leading the efforts to start to investigate links between pesticide exposure and whatever might be going on. And we had an initial community meeting in Sonoma, and I was really surprised. People were really, really interested to know what is in our water. That was the top question. Very accustomed to doing air studies, done those in other places, dust sampling studies, but this community really wanted to know what's in our water. So it was out of that initial community meeting, the best kind of community-based research, because we were not researchers coming with a question, we were researchers coming to the community asking what their question was, and the study truly originated from the community's curiosity and interest and concern, frankly, about what might be in the water in a community that's surrounded by agricultural operations. So out of that, we successfully put together the proposal to the California Breast Cancer Research Program. And along the way, Nicole stepped in for Megan and has led our project with such heart and such grace. So we're just really, really grateful to work with you, Nicole. And yeah, thank you. Really excited to share the results tonight and to think through what might be next for our research partnership.
Thank you. Let's pass it to Dr. Reynolds to introduce herself.
Well, let me just say that's a very hard act to follow. You so nicely outline sort of the genesis of all of this. This is definitely a community-based project. It is the community's project. It's been such a pleasure to be able to work together and to have this nice opportunity to fold in the expertise of our colleagues from the USGS, which you are also about to meet. So I won't say much more other than to pass the baton to Julie to say a quick hello, and then we can move it to USGS.
Hi, thanks, Peggy, and thank you, Nicole and Jane, for setting the stage for us. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Julie Von Baron, a research epidemiologist at UCSF. And so I'll go ahead and pass it over to Michelle and Dana from USGS.
Hi, I'm Michelle Haddock. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey. I sit at the California Water Science Center in Sacramento. I've done a bunch of research on pesticides, a lot of it all over California, a lot of times ag drainage and that type of work. So I was excited to be part of this team, kind of extending a lot of the work that my group has done in California. And now I'll pass it to Dana.
Yeah, Dana Copen, a research hydrologist with the USGS in Iowa City. I have 30 plus years of environmental research, particularly on pesticides. So yeah, I was glad to be a part of this research.
Thank you. Let's pass it to Halima.
Hi everyone, my name is Halima and I'm the program manager at Breast Cancer Action. So I joined this research project arguably somewhat late, but I'm really excited to have worked with wonderful people and the Sonoma community as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Halima. We also had another advocate from Breast Cancer Action who worked with us for a period of time, Jayla Burton, and I'd like to acknowledge her efforts here today. And now let's dig into a little bit of the context. Jane, you gave us some great context as to how you got involved in this. Can you frame up for us why Graton, why this research in this community was so important and the aims of the research, please?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Realized that really the first thing was just a quick intro. And of course, I started right in on our research context. So yeah. Why Graton? Because we were working, Megan and Nicole had been really building the movement in Sonoma County to start to investigate the impacts of pesticides on communities where that are exposed to agricultural operations. And so Megan directed me to the efforts of GRAPE, Graton, I forget actually what the acronym is, Nicole, it was
Graton against synthetic pesticides.
Graton against synthetic pesticides. And it was out of that we zeroed in on the community of Graton, partly because it is surrounded by agricultural operations, but also because all of the residents of Graton, as I understand it, rely on well water for their domestic water supply. And those wells are, some of them are quite old, some of them might be quite shallow, some of them hand dug, as we say. And so wanting to see whether there were any impacts to the groundwater supply from nearby operations. And again, very much led by Megan, by the community, by the interest and concern that was brought to us as a research team. So our aims, briefly, were do you have them up?
I do.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, our three aims were to engage the community in a dialogue about groundwater contamination, pesticide drift, and to share with the community, as we're doing tonight, the design of our study, information on results, and also, most importantly, ways to limit exposure if that's what we found. One of the things that we were really looking at was the quality and presence of filtration systems and whether that made a difference. So we were trying to zero in on some behaviors that could be protective as well. This was deliberately a reconnaissance research project because it's expensive. It's expensive to run sampling. And so with our generous but not infinite grant funding, we zeroed in on being able to properly investigate in just the 6 homes that we zeroed in on, and decided, since it was a reconnaissance research project, we wanted to zero in on homes that we suspected might be particularly vulnerable because of the depth of their well, because of their proximity to operations. And so that was kind of part of the main part of the selection criteria. As well as measuring pesticide contamination, we got to actually, it was an add-on to our original proposal, was to measure total estrogenic activity in domestic water supplies as well. We also deployed silicone bands that were stationary, affixed at each location to measure for pesticide or evaluate whether there was pesticide drift that was captured by those silicone bands as well. And then finally, we're part of Graton is an agricultural community, and an important aim of the study was to increase communication between residents and growers in the area in order to increase mutual understanding across all stakeholders that call Graton home.
Thanks, Jane. So as Jane mentioned, this was a reconnaissance study. So we studied 6 households of the 35 that had applied in the community. This was our study selection criteria. Those who were within 2 miles of agriculture, those who had a shallow well, either hand dug or well depth between 100 and up to 50 feet. And then also to consider the soil substrate and the lot elevation. This map kind of gives you an area. We can't disclose the exact locations, but this will kind of give you an area of where we sampled. You can see here that this is where Atascadero Creek runs through. So we have sites that represent both sides of Atascadero Creek, one from the Ross Station area, one from the Manzana Sousa corner area, one from the west side of Graton proper, 2 from residential areas, and then the 6th site, a bit more rural, but also important site for us to determine what might the exposure be. I'd like to pass or invite now to Michelle Fladdick to share with us a little bit about the research methodology and the findings.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, as Jane has already kind of summarized, we did 2 different types of sampling. One was to sample the water at 6 residents, sampled at the outdoor location where the water would have been entering the house, and also at the indoor tap. And I realized, Nicole, you had the air fans on first, but we also did these silicone bands. So they're the same thing that a lot of people wear to support your favorite cause. They've also been used in a lot of human health studies. They have people wear these silicone bands and then look at any potential chemical exposure. My research group has been using them as a potential tool to look at environmental exposures. We put them out in the environment where we want to get a better idea of any potential pesticide drift, dust settling that might be in those areas. So those were placed at the 6 residences. They were usually placed on a fence line or somewhere that was kind of at air level so that they could capture anything that might be drifting. In the area, the silicone bands were placed out for 1 month prior to the water sampling that was done at each household. We've kind of used 1 month as sort of an integrative time on a lot of our other studies. And so that was what we went with for the study. For both the silicone bands and the water samples, my lab analyzed for over 187 pesticides. This includes herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. Also say we had other partner USGS labs. I know the estrogenicity has already been referenced. We also have a lab in Kansas that did glyphosate and its major degradant. So that is obviously a widely used herbicide used kind of everywhere and also of concern. So while my lab didn't do that particular herbicide, it was included in the analysis. So that kind of sums up how we collected the samples. And then is the next slide the results? Yeah, let me. So yeah, just in general, to start with what we detected on the silicone bands, there were detects at most sites. They weren't always the same pesticides detected at the sites. We had 2 herbicides detected. They're pendimethalin and dithiopyr. pendimethalin was detected at every site. Just to speak on my experience with a lot of other pesticide studies, pendimethalin is a widely used herbicide. We find it a lot of places, so it's used in a variety of settings. We detected 5 fungicides, and once again, we detect these fungicides at a lot of other sites, so there wasn't anything necessarily unique about these detections, and we only detected 1 insecticide. So I want to move to the next slide. As far as the water, we had very few detections in the water. Like I said, I'm going to mostly talk about the pesticides. Dana can kind of come in a little bit later and talk about the estrogenicity. But we only detected 1 herbicide in any of the samples. We detected trifluralin, which is another widely used herbicide at 2 sites, but I will note that these concentrations were very low. My research lab has really low detection levels because we do a lot of research work and we look at a lot of feed and transport. So we try to get very low detection levels, and the food detections that we got were right at our detection level. And in the next slide, I think we actually show some of the concentrations. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a little more difficult for some of you to read all these concentrations, and you can potentially digest them later. But just to note that the water concentrations were really low. We're looking at part per trillion levels. A lot of human health levels for pesticides, not necessarily the one detected here, are above part per billion levels. So we are well below those concentrations. The concentrations in the silicone bands varied a little bit more. I will say it's a research technique, so there aren't necessarily benchmark levels we can compare them to, but they do note that there are pesticides in these areas. They are drifting, but in comparison to what I have seen in many other studies, these are relatively low concentrations. And so, Dana, did you want to touch a little bit more? And I guess I also know, I brought glyphosate up earlier. We did not detect glyphosate or its major degradant. We did not do it. We do not have the methods to do it on the silicone bands, but we did not detect it in any of the water samples. And so Dana wants to chime in some about the estrogenicity tests.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we felt this would be a good tool, complementary tool to complement Michelle's and the Kansas water and Michelle's band results. It doesn't tell you what necessarily is causing the biological activity, in this case, total estrogenicity, but it'll tell you that it's biological active. And so that's, kind of a nice tool to use. We've been starting to use that in our tap water studies that the infrastructure team uses that I am a part of. So we again sampled the indoor and outdoor samples, sent them to our sent them to Kansas for extraction, and the extracts then went to our lab out east on the East Coast to look at estrogenicity. Did have a couple wells that had very low estrogenicity, and when we compare with the other published tap water results, which we can share if anybody's interested in from Iowa, Puerto Rico, Cape Cod, there's a couple other ones. These are kind of right in line where there's occasional sporadic detections that I would consider pretty low concentrations. Still, some are biologically active, but very, very, very low. So I think that's good news.
Thanks, Dana. So let's pass it to our research team at UC San Francisco to talk to us a little bit about what these results mean.
Well, I can give that a start. I think it's a group effort in terms of what it means. So what you did hear, I think, from Michelle as well as from Dana is it is perhaps reassuring that none of the chemicals detected were known carcinogens or endocrine disruptors, keeping in mind that the context of this study began with concerns about breast cancer, and it was funded by the Breast Cancer Research Program. So that was some of our focus. The one chemical that was found in water samples, trifluralin, is a possible carcinogen that, as you heard, was present at levels below the health advisory standards. The estrogenicity was certainly, it was an experimental thing. It was particularly of interest because of our focus on potential breast cancer risks. And while it was present in 2 water samples, the levels, as you saw from that chart, were lower than other studies. And glyphosate, which has been, as you all know, a topic of particular concern, was not detected in the water samples, and was actually, as Michelle pointed out, the bans, the analyses of the bans did not include glyphosate, so it was not detected. That said, I think it's worth noting that looking in the bigger picture, there are over 80,000 chemicals in use in commerce in the US, and honestly, not much is known about them. And of these, likewise, only a small proportion of the many pesticides in use have been evaluated for carcinogenicity or studied really for cancer risk. So that is taking that all in context. It does look like there were some detects, levels appeared to be low. It's not necessarily clear what that means. Breast cancer rates, which was one of the initial sources of concern in Sonoma County in the most recent years, are slightly higher than average rates in California, but they're not among the highest. And because Graton is such a small community, specific rates for Graton aren't really available. Taking this all together, I think it's important to remember that this was a very small pilot study. It was designed really as a reconnaissance to see whether there are particular things that we should be following up on, and whether some of the particular exposures of concern were present in these very small samples. I think it's worth mentioning in terms of the strategy that we were really only able to sample at one particular point in time, doesn't necessarily cover the year-long potential for exposure. But all in all, we didn't see anything that was highly alarming in the context of our concern about breast cancer research. I think it's worth talking about, however, the fact that, there is some evidence of pesticide drift, some potential for some exposures, and that is something that I think is worth chatting about in general for the community. I'm just wondering, Julie, do you want to add anything to this sort of general overview?
I think that's great. I don't really have anything to add. I did see there's a question in the chat about who does have the highest rates of breast cancer. So I just wanted to say that I can put a link in the chat so that if people want to go online and you can look at the county level rates.
Yeah, I can say it's Marin. Marin wins this round. It's probably no surprise to many of you. Marin County appears to have the highest county-specific rates from the last go-round. And yeah, I think if you put that in the chat, people can see. Actually, it's interesting that some of the counties with higher rates are not necessarily the ones you might have expected. One of the counties actually is Nevada County, which has higher rates, where Jane and I started some of our work together. So that's, the rates do vary. And again, Sonoma County rates don't necessarily reflect what's going on in Graton specifically. And I just wanted to see, Michelle or Dana, would you like to add anything in terms of the specific things that we did find? I noticed that 2 of the fungicides are actually classified as possible human carcinogens, but those again were not in excess. So anything either Dana or Michelle would like to add in terms of sort of that big picture? Okay.
No, the only thing I would add in terms, just to put it into context, we just published, the USGS just published a study about a month ago looking at farmers' tap water in northeast Iowa, which is very heavily agricultural area, certainly not grapes, but it's, it is corn, soybeans, hogs, cattle, very intense. We sampled 47 farmers tap water who were part of the agricultural health study cohort, which is one of the longest duration cohorts in the nation, but they never had the tap water sampled in. We found lots of pesticides, way more than we did here for this day. So just trying to put it in context in another agriculture area and in another kind of hydrogeologic setting. And I can certainly share that publication with Nicole, who can share it with people here.
Yeah, and I think just to add a bit more on what Dana said, we work in a variety of areas, including those influenced by agriculture to different degrees. And, I was as pleasantly surprised at how few water detections we got. We've measured samples from, all over. Even with the silicone bands, I realized, they are detecting things. There is this potential for exposure, but we've also placed them in national parks and other areas and also detected things. So it does kind of just point out that, yes, these chemicals are in the environment, and they can come from many different places, especially with things like dust transport. We don't always know how far away that's coming from, and things can travel. And I just think that, that there are also other things besides pesticides that can be in a water supply. I know the USGS is really trying to work on doing a more, like we're trying to do to have a comprehensive thing that look at more than just say one class of chemicals to kind of get this bigger picture about what you might be being exposed to. And of course, there are many routes of exposures through pesticides and other chemicals throughout, food ingestion or other sorts of activities. So I think, at least from this, we're not seeing a lot of pesticides in the water supply. And we did try and target what we thought would be more vulnerable for this area. But as Peggy did point out, it was a one-time sampling, but for groundwater, that's less of an issue than, say, for people who have more of a surface water supply, where that composition of that water changes more frequently over time.
Thank you so much. At this time, what we'd like to do is take the remainder of the time we have and once create space for questions and answers. The research team is here and available to answer questions that you might have. And then I'd like to invite Halima to support us in her role as an advocate and discuss next steps and what you, the community, would like us to do given the results detected from the study. So I'm opening up the floor. Feel free to raise your hand or kind of just jump in and ask any questions that you might have at this time. Sally.
Hi, thank you, everyone. My question is, it seems like a lot of these levels are low. And my curiosity is about long-term exposure, because you can look at the numbers and say, oh, well, that's not very much, but I've been here 23 years. I'm drinking this water for 23 years, 23 years of drinking water with trifluoralin.
Mm-hmm.
Is that why I have breast cancer?
It's a good question that we don't really have an answer for, but yes. So you're talking about chronic exposure over a long period of time, which may be very different than acute exposures. And I think that's a reasonable question for which we don't really have the answer. Thanks.
Would it be helpful to test blood or, has anyone had any experience with working with humans that have the cancer and checking the blood or organs, or is there some way that we can correlate these chemicals with cancer to get a better picture?
Yeah, certainly there have been studies taking a look at body burden for a variety of chemicals, including pesticides. Most of those have focused on old organic chlorine pesticides that are no longer in use. I think there's much less information these days on some of the more commonly used pesticides, but studies continue that do include blood samples in addition to environmental samples. Here we were really focused on trying to get a better handle on what was the environment as opposed to what's in people, but they're both definitely relevant.
Yeah, just to chime in with some stuff that USGS did with folks at the University of Iowa at the Center for Health Effects and Environmental Contamination, using that same study from Northeast Iowa. We talked about looking at farmers, and we sent specimen cups in advance and asked them to collect urine. So they had urine, in the refrigerator by the time it got there, and we analyzed for particularly for neonicotinoid insecticides, and actually found that 100% of these farmers had neonics in their urine, but it didn't match up exactly with what we found in the water samples. Actually, some of the samples, some of the compounds we measured weren't even used, registered for use in the US. So that suggests it could be people's diet. Obviously, a lot of fruit and vegetables come from outside the US. So yeah, these are studies are being done, but just kind of starting. So I think more of those kind of research will be conducted as studies continue.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, I just have I put it in the chat. I want a clarification. I read an article somewhere that came, I think it was 2017, that the childhood cancer rates in Sonoma and Napa counties were the third, I think the second and third highest in the state. So number one, is that true? And if it is true, is there any correlation, or do people have any idea why that's the case?
I think we need to take a look at the most recent rates on that. And Julie did put in the chat. I don't know, Julie, if you can do a quick run on that, but that would be looking, I guess, at all sites of childhood cancer.
So you heard that Sonoma County had high rates of childhood cancer, is that? Okay, I can see what the most recent time period is.
It was Sonoma County and Napa counties, which made it look like it might be pesticide related since they're side by side.
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of interest in research on leukemia, which is the most common cancer in children, and pesticide associated risks. And it's been kind of mixed. There have been little snippets suggesting that there might be something going on, but it's a little bit unclear. But maybe while we move along, if you get a, did you get it up?
On the website, it's suppressing those numbers. So it just brings up the point that childhood cancer is very rare compared to adult cancer. And so sometimes the cancer registry will suppress the rates, but I'll look, and if I find anything, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Thanks. We'll circle back then. Let's give the floor to Kathleen and Woody, please.
There is data available on childhood cancer through, I found it a few years ago. And I believe the study that I looked at, it was higher in the Central Valley. So that brings up I guess it's sort of a question. So we live in Watsonville. I actually 25 years ago worked on an exposure assessment of the children of pesticide applicators in the Wenatchee Valley in Eastern Washington. And as part of my master's project as a nurse practitioner. And, what they found at that time, 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago now, was that the pesticides bioaccumulate inside people's houses, that even the organophosphates, which were the substitution for DDT because they were supposed to break down more quickly. If they aren't outside in the sun and the rain, they still are there in the carpets of the houses. And kind of the point I'm circling around is that it's great that you guys were able to get the funds and the people together to do this in Sonoma County. There is not very much research being done aside from the Chamaco study in Salinas of the exposures of farm workers and farm worker families and the children whose parents worked in the field and had the highest exposures and who live close to the fields, who go to school close to the fields. Our farm worker families are the most exposed, and it's very rare for them to get a band on their wrists or in their house, or to just to get research on what are the long-term, what are the cumulative effects, what are the effects of early exposure. And now that some of that data from the Chamaco study and other studies like it are emerging, we're finding that there are a whole lot of body systems that could possibly be impacted, especially by early pesticide exposure. So I guess if I have a question, it's like, how can we shift the focus to a social justice focus for our research resources? Jane's heard all this from me before. But how can we move upstream and get some research done on those people who are the most exposed in a way that will help inform safety practices for both residents of agricultural communities, like the people in Graton, and consumers of the products that are grown in those.
Mention Pajaro.
Yeah, and Pajaro, for example, we just had a big flood across the river from us. Fortunately, we only had a little water in our streets, and they had their whole town flooded. And over again, we hear from people, we don't know what's in this mud. We don't know what was in that water. We can't drink our water now. They're being told they can't drink their water, and pesticides are one of the pollutants that could be impacting them. But the dust is going to be there for years, and we don't know what's in the dust. So where are the resources to help us find out what are the exposures from these multiple avenues of exposure? Sorry, I went on so long. It's a big question.
It's a big question. I have to say that I lived for a while in Felton, so those storms really, I was there during one of the big rain years. That's really tough. So those are good questions. It's part of what I think as a group we've also, this was this little opportunity for some funds from the breast cancer research program, which has been particularly interested in funding community initiated community concerns, much more so than some other funding agencies, but that does not preclude us from moving on and up. National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences has actually been very interested as well in supporting work that's sort of that's community initiated and community based. So there are, as you point out, there are lots of big questions. And so the question at the moment is sort of maybe what are some immediate steps that could be next here? And I'm seeing Jane nodding and probably having something to say. I think that's been a nice move into this discussion.
Yeah, I not really, except just Kathleen, because you're on so many of our coalition calls, how just resource poor we are. And I have to say that, if it wasn't for the efforts of Nicole, I don't know how we would have run this study. It was tremendously time and energy exhaustive for Nicole in particular. And we got our hands full, as you know, dealing with statewide policy. So we're really delighted to join in with community-based projects when we can, but it's the when we can that's problematic. I'm not in the academic world except when I get to work with the likes of Peggy. And so I don't really understand the full funding world. So I don't know what to say about how to I absolutely hear you. We need a lot more of this kind of study. And I'll also say that it's a lot. There's not a lot of funding to go around. There's not a lot of funders like California Breast Cancer Research Program, as Peggy flagged, that really get what community-based research is. Mostly they don't. They think they do, but they don't. This is a funder that really has prioritized. They say, we know a couple of things that we know cause breast cancer, but we know communities have a lot more ideas and a lot more to bring to the table so we can flesh out that question. So it's a great funding pot. And I don't know where to go from here. So yeah, I didn't really have anything helpful to add, actually, except that it's important, and I wish we could all clone ourselves and do a lot more of it.
Thanks, Jane. I think if there's anything I would add to that is that we are aware of our most vulnerable community members in consideration of this. And although the focus of this study was to address breast cancer, we also have been working with local community organizing groups to better understand what the needs are of our vulnerable community members. So, for example, there's this amazing group of students at Willowside Middle School in Graton who have taken this on as their environmental justice project, not only last year, but this year as well, because they are concerned and they want to bring awareness and at least know when sprays are going to happen in their community so that they can take the efforts to protect themselves and their community members. We've also met with North Bay Jobs with Justice. Sorry, it's the witching hour. All the animals are moving in. So with North Bay Jobs with Justice, we've talked with them about the possibility of, if we were able to do additional studies, could those studies include a focus on our farm working community members so that we could better understand what their exposure is like out in the field. If anyone doesn't, if I see that there's a couple questions in the chat, I'm just going to read them. One is, can you repeat when exactly the study took place? Just wondering if it was this time frame coincided with all the vineyard spraying season. Yes, what we had done was look at the pesticide use reports going back several years to determine when the highest concentrations of spray were happening. The field samples with the silicone bands were deployed March 3rd of 2021 and retrieved April 4th of 2021. So they were out there during that month of March and early April. And then a question from Pam's.
Nicole,
Jane,
can I just jump in with a plug for one of our major statewide campaigns, which is we are pushing really hard, and we will be getting a first ever precedent setting, actually, a system of advanced notification for pesticide applications, which really doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's definitely the preference of the agricultural industry to continue the pest management practices without scrutiny. And so there's very, very little notice given to communities in advance and anybody that lives near a pesticide application will understand the gross injustice of having chemicals sprayed near you without being told about it. You know, it's unconscionable, and yet it's the pretty much standard practice. So we will be getting some form of advanced notification of pesticides. And I wanted to raise it here because Nicole just mentioned that all we could do in terms of timing for this project is look backwards at pesticide use reporting. California has truly rigorous system of pesticide use reporting. It's, you know, sort of unique in this nation anyway, and probably globally too, but it's backward looking. And as conditions change, and with climate change, conditions change rapidly, you know, just because they sprayed in April last year doesn't mean they're going to spray in April this year. They're going to spray when the pests happen. So we do believe that if and when we get advanced notification of pesticide applications, we can do much, much better and more tailored research. We can do air monitoring and water quality monitoring when we know there are pesticide applications happening locally. So we're not necessarily, I mean, there's a million reasons to want advanced notification, most urgently for people that live right near applications, but there's a research element too. It's really important, and we're excited that we can do much better tailored research going forward, hopefully.
Thanks, Jane. That's wonderful news. All right. Any other questions?
And there's lots more in the chat, I think, Nicole. Yeah.
Sure, there sure are. Okay, I'll go to Pam Strayer's. Oh, I see a hand. Ron, please. You're on mute. We still can't hear you. There we go. We got you.
Yeah. What's the path forward from all the data that you collected? Does it just go sit somewhere, or is it going to be brought like to the county level?
That's an excellent question. There are many paths forward for this. I think each of our organizations, the research team, will publish that. The USGS is working on theirs. And I think that we're also going to get a report written from the University of California. But then in terms of like, what are we going to do about what we've discovered in this? That's dependent on us as a community. And what we'd like to engage in conversation after we do the Q&A is a little bit more around what is it that you, the community, would like us to do, and at least lean into and give our best effort towards, given the findings of the data. Anyone else on the research team want to add to that? Oh, sure.
You know, I just want to add that, you know, one of the limitations is that when we do this kind of research, it is baby steps. And you all have the big questions and the big vision. And we're only able to do sort of incremental approaches to all of this. So hopefully this is a little baby step that will help us to be thinking along with community about where you would like to go, what you would like to do. And you know, I think your comment, Kathleen, about Chamacos has been a really rich source. We're also doing some work. We're also doing some work actually in the Central Valley and the Fresno area, looking at some of these issues. There are lots of big questions. What can we do to help facilitate moving forward in terms of as an epidemiologist, it's always very frustrating because we can't really answer the question of what causes disease. But we have been very interested and fortunate to be able to work with partners to at least try to take a look at what people are exposed to. And hopefully there are chemicals people shouldn't be exposed to in their water, in their air, in their environment, whether or not you say it causes a particular disease. And so I think a lot of our focus really has been on trying better to understand what people are exposed to and, you know, what can we do about it? You heard Jane talk about some steps that maybe we could take in terms of thinking about pesticide exposures. That's some very practical kinds of things.
Thanks, Peggy. I do also want to follow up and let you know that the results of this study have been shared with the County of Sonoma, with our Ag Commissioner's Office, our Public Health Office, and our Environmental Health Office. They are aware of the exposure and what's going on here, and are willing to work with us in next steps, whatever we decide to move forward and do. And interestingly, I'll circle around because Pam Strayer asked a question in the chat. Does any of this data align with the PUR, the pesticide use reports in Graton? And yes and no. So there's an interesting thing when we talk about the origins of these pesticides. Where do they come from? Predominantly, these are agriculturally used pesticides. However, they're not the only ones who are using these types of pesticides. When we did the pesticide use reports, we were able to discern that, yes, there are farms in our communities that are using some of these pesticides that we detected. And there are some pesticides detected that nobody declared using in any pesticide use report. Additionally, we discerned that some of the pesticides that we detected, including the pendimethalin, was reportedly used by Caltrans to spray our roadsides in our communities. And so there's a movement right now, I think it's AB 99, to try to it's called the Healthy Highways Initiative, to try to give local communities the jurisdiction to decide what Caltrans is able to come in and spray in a community. And at the very least, like we're saying, give advance notice of when and what they're spraying, where they're going to be spraying it. Did that answer your questions, Pam?
Yeah, I guess I was interested in finding out how long ago that Caltrans data, how long ago were their applications?
We looked at the Caltrans data during the time that we had done the sampling. However, we know that there are Caltrans use of pesticides that are happening on a regular basis in our community.
And are those part of the pesticide use report?
Yes, Caltrans is required to report their use of pesticides to the county ag commissioner, who logs that information. They don't have to do it on the same timely basis that the farmers do, but they do have to report it. Okay, I'm seeing another question here from Juliana. Can you please give some advice on strategies that residents can use to limit their exposures, even if it's only low levels in the environment? So I'll jump in, but then I hope my research team can also add some contributions. I think one of the things I'm mindful of is my dogs, forgive me. Simple things like removing your shoes before you come inside your home, right? So that you're not tracking things in and out. If you've been out working in a farm, that you change your clothes before you get in your car, or that you change your clothes before you're embracing your loved ones, so that you're reducing the potential of cross-contamination if you've been exposed. Some of the things we know around here, the sprays will happen at night. Oftentimes the spraying doesn't happen during the daytime, it's happening at night. And so we would encourage community members to keep their windows closed, to make sure that you're washing off any outdoor eating areas properly before you use them. Be mindful of your animals as they may track things in and out. And then I think in terms of being able to reduce exposure is to build relationships with the farming community that lives nearby you and see if they will let you know. Many of the community members that I had met with said that they would infrequently and inconsistently, but sometimes receive notification about when a spray was going to happen from their neighbors. And so building relationships with our farm working communities so that we have that rapport is a helpful thing. It hasn't been consistently executed, which is why we'd like to see the policy put in place that we have advance notice of intent to spray so that our community members can better prepare themselves and reduce exposures. Team, what do you guys think?
I can say that I know since water was a component of this, there are many different water treatments that you can do at your point of use. One of the most inexpensive and effective at getting a wide variety of chemicals are those carbon filters. So any charcoal carbon type filter you can put on your tap. Those are very effective at moving a wide range of contaminants. I always put it with the major caveat is you please need to change those according to the manufacturer. Do not leave them on too long. Because then what you've done is, when they've reached their capacity, what's ever been absorbed onto that carbon will come off. So if that's something that people are, looking for as far as their drinking water, that's an option. And especially considering we only tested pesticides, and there typically tends to be a wide variety of things that could be in your water. I also tell people, I realize a lot of people who are on private wells, get your water tested. There are some, options, I think, even for some parts of the state, or, places you can go to look for. But I have, as somebody who's mostly on public supply, I read my public supply water reports, but for those people who are on private wells, I think just to, get your water tested for a variety of things to make sure that, everything from metals to other types of contaminants is always a good practice.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions coming up? And if you're someone like me who needs a little bit of time to digest and process, and you have a question later on, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to liaison amongst the research team. Let's see. Okay, if we're kind of at that place of like, we've answered the questions that are presenting themselves now, I'd like to yield and invite Halima to share with us a little bit about what advocacy and using this evidence that we have to kind of create, a pathway or what's next, given the results of this reconnaissance study. Halima?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Nicole. And like I mentioned earlier, so I joined this project pretty late, so I'm new to the whole thing. Jayla did most of the work, and she's not around today, but I'm going to have to lean on Nicole's expertise and familiarity with this project at some point. But because this is an evidence-based advocacy, the logical next steps, or the next steps I see going forward for us is, first, I like the fact that we've highlighted the intersectionality of breast cancer. So with this project, it's obvious that environmental justice is also health justice, because a lot of chemicals that are released into the atmosphere, our exposure to toxic chemicals, definitely add and somewhat cause breast cancer. And the next steps, the next feasible steps is just to keep educating ourselves and just creating awareness about the pesticides and the chemicals that are released into the atmosphere, and how this influences water and other things people take in that cause breast cancer, if that makes sense. And yeah, the next feasible action step at the moment just seems, to the team at Breast Cancer Action, next realistic goals, the next realistic action steps you can take is just keep educating the leaders, the government officials in charge of not just Sonoma County, but other counties in California, and just keep on creating awareness about toxins and how they're dangerous to the human health, basically.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you join our study and share what wisdom you have with us. I think what I want to present is that this was a reconnaissance study, and part of that provides the opportunity for a next step study, if that's something that the community is interested in doing. We've had discussions amongst the research team and believe that it is worthy of further investigation, perhaps expanding the study to more participants, perhaps putting in an equity prioritization focusing on children and farm workers, and leaning in on that regard to do another more expansive study that we would be able to have the data meet different questions and criteria that we as researchers kind of came away with more questions, you know, like good science doesn't always answer all your questions. Sometimes it begets more questions. And I think that we have other questions that we want to address as a result of this study. So there's an option on the table for the community to explore doing another research, an expansive research study here in the community of Graton. The other thing that was raised, particularly by some of the participants when they received the data, was what can they do in relationship with our local county ag commissioner's office to be better prepared? Could we advocate on behalf of this larger movement that Jane had mentioned to, excuse me, get advance notice of intent to sprays? Could we, as the Sonoma County community, take the bold steps to pilot something like that here? Could we be cutting edge as an agricultural community and put to rest any of the concerns people might have about that by doing our due diligence and educating and informing community members ahead of time, instead of, like Jane so eloquently described, you know, we're basing it on data from last year or the year before, and not really having an accurate understanding of when we are most exposed, because we just don't know when they're going to spray, and there are no clear systems or protocols in place to ensure that that happens. So those are two things that have come up in our questioning so far. Jane.
And I'll just add to that in preparation for developing the statewide notification system that we expect will roll out in late 2024, the Department of Pesticide Regulation is currently soliciting willing agricultural commissioners to launch local pilot programs. There were 4 that ran last year. One of them in Watsonville. Kathleen and Woody on this call are very familiar with that because they lived in the pilot area. They live in the pilot area. But the Department of Pesticide Regulation would love to have more. If there's advocacy to the county ag commissioner on that front would be really super timely right now. They're looking for pilots. Sonoma could be one. Graton could be one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jane. I did have a conversation with Andrew Smith, who is our county ag commissioner, who said that if he was given the mandate from the County Board of Supervisors to implement an NOI, he would do so here in our community. So what is needed in that regard is to advocate and reach out to our county supervisors and our local electeds to let them know what you as a community want to have happen. But so those are a couple items that we've outlined. What else could we do? Are there other thoughts amongst our community of ways in which we could move forward, given what we've learned? Sally.
I'm curious about having conversations with the farmers that are applying the pesticides. And I'm curious about involving, I mean, I know so many farmers around here that are organic or biodynamic or don't use pesticides and they're successful. So it seems to me like if you could bring these two groups of people together, if there's an openness that it could be very beneficial to sort of re-educate or try to get the farmers involved and say, you know, we're concerned, look what we found, and you can do it this way as well and be successful. And they could work together, maybe sharing ideas, how to farm basically without all these pesticides, or at least a fraction of them, because it's being done. I feel like if you're going to hold a sprayer with glyphosate, why don't you just hold a weed whacker? You know, it's the same gesture. You're saving money. You're not using poison. I mean, I see them spraying glyphosate around our water sources. our water sources. Santa Rosa, I mean, the water that goes to Santa Rosa, the Russian River, it's not necessary. So I'm wondering how to get a conversation going with the actual, I don't want to use the word perpetrators, but that's probably not. I'm not sure if anyone's spoken with them or the, Sonoma Sustainable. They have social workings. They're grouped in a way. Has anybody spoken to them about these findings, or it seems like it could be just a community outreach gesture, or we don't have to go to the state and, regulate them, but as a community, like, hey, you guys, there's some other ways here and you'll save money, you'll be successful. I don't know. Seems easy to me, but it's probably not. So those are just some thoughts. I've been thinking about this for years and I don't quite know how to navigate that, or, but there are these old time farmers around here and, they have a lot of land and they have a lot to do and they're just used to their little routines and their protocols, which I get, but things can change. So I just wonder if there's a friendly way to have these conversations.
I think that's an excellent question. I think it goes back to something Halima said, to just keep educating, because it sounds like there's a need and an opportunity here to educate our farmers on some best practices, and that there are successful models of transitioning to regenerative and organic agriculture that are highly successful and profitable. And that in many ways, we are looking at very old models of how agriculture is done. And on the larger statewide movement, we're noticing trends towards more regenerative and prioritizing organic agriculture happening. So it seems like the moment is ripe for that. And if it seems easy to you, I invite you to move in that ease place with us, as we figure out how we might do that and continuing to educate the farmers in that regard. I know at Sonoma SASS, we're definitely dedicated to that and lifting up those best practices. And you've been a great ally to us there. So I think that's important. I also think what's important in regards to what you shared is to do a little bit of demystifying the assumptions made with Sustainable Sonoma. And I'll share this, that one of our participants in the study said that he did not believe that he would be exposed to pesticides living next to a vineyard because the vineyard was Sustainable Sonoma certified. We want to dispel the myth that means that Sustainable Sonoma equates with organic agriculture or regenerative agriculture. It does not. It does not offer incentivization for reducing or eliminating the use of synthetic pesticides. It's more of a business campaign and a marketing campaign than it is an oversight regulatory body within our community. But they have been extraordinarily effective at their marketing campaign and getting most people to believe that Sustainable Sonoma means organic or reduced pesticides, and it does not. So a counter campaign or something that might help bring greater awareness would be something of benefit, because we as an organization have reached out to Sustainable Sonoma to collaborate with them, and they have not been interested in partnering with us or changing the messaging or including addressing the use of pesticides in their sustainability criteria.
So the question is, what would invite them to want to make some changes? What is their language that?
Well, I don't want to discount the heart of our farmers or our farm working communities here. They're very hardworking and dedicated community members. And I think that they did a great job at Sustainable Sonoma in marketing. And so if we can help lift up the reputations of those farm workers that are doing the regenerative and organic practices as the gold standard for what we want to see in our community, and help motivate those within Sustainable Sonoma to enhance their criteria to be something that truly is sustainable, because it is not sustainable continuing to spray harmful and synthetic pesticides in our community. It's just not sustainable. Not sustainable for human health. It's not sustainable for environmental health. And every single one of those pesticides we detected have warnings for environmental health hazards. So this is something that goes beyond us as humans who are impacted. It's about the health of our entire ecosystems. And so the pressure and the market driven, I think, are two areas that we could influence in that regard. Kathleen and Woody, did I see your hand up earlier?
Well, just to piggyback on what's been said about organic and regenerative ag, there's also other than the public health aspect of those practices, there are healthy soils practices that sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gases. And believe it or not, Santa Clara County, that's where San Jose has what they call the agricultural resilience incentives program, where they will fund just various practices such as composting, green cover cropping, hedgerow production, and so on. And they'll help fund those practices, so you don't have to be totally organic to do that. You can be in a conventional farm and then start adopting those practices. And through the comment planning program of USDA, they can figure how much carbon would actually be sequestered, and the county can count that in their climate action plan. We're hoping to do this in Santa Cruz County, where we live, and we're starting with the city council and the county supervisors to try to convince them that this is a good idea. So it has a twofold approach of advantages to public health and also addressing climate change, doing climate smart agriculture, and being able to actually inventory through computer programs how much carbon is being sequestered by these various practices. Thank you.
Thank you for lifting up that connection to climate change and our need for healthy soils to be able to support carbon sequestration. That's been one of our guiding principles in being able to lift up alternative land management practices, including the use of grazers. Getting grazing animals out on the land has significant benefits for farms. So again, like what I'm hearing are there's so many, we know the right things to be doing. There's so many amazing solutions already in play and being tested. And what we might benefit from here as a community is a galvanized effort to consolidate all of those educational resources and train it forward. Provide those opportunities to our local farmers to not only be able to learn the best practices, but also, like you had mentioned, with some of the funding shifts that are happening at the federal level, to be able to gain the support resources they need to take those steps towards transitioning their agricultural practices. I want to recap some of the things that I heard, because I'm seeing in the chat too that there's, interest. I'm reading express interest in advocating for Graton to be a notice for intent to spray. Questions about how we might go about doing that. Lifting up Graton as a potential pilot and advocating for that. I'm seeing multiple people there. If that's something that you would like us to continue moving forward with, can I get your consent here to keep advocating in that regard and build that in as one of the things that we do in our advocacy platform?
And Nicole would definitely welcome you to a representative to participate with the statewide coalition who are working with the pilots in Ventura, Watsonville, Stanislaus County, and Riverside, which were the 4 last year's pilots, to, advocate for better pilots. None of those pilots actually provided the exact location of sprays. They only provided the approximate location of applications, which made them non-actionable and a little overwhelming. If you get told about every possible pesticide application within a mile of you, but all you want to know about is the one across the street, so you know when to close your windows. You tune it out. It's not actionable. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just overwhelming. And I think Kathleen and Woody can really speak to that, because that was certainly an issue with the Watsonville pilot. So next steps in terms of advocating, and now is the time for Graton or Sonoma to be part of this program and to pilot a better system of notification, would be if your ag commissioner says he'll do as their supervisors tell him, the supervisors is the place to go. And they have, of course, public meetings every month and public comment at those meetings, and a show of even just a handful of SASS members calling for this could be super powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree with you, Jane. I also want to just lift up that we've had tremendous support from District 5 Supervisor Linda Hopkins with regards to this. And here, when we were looking at the pesticide use reports, we knew, well, Graton, first of all, is an unincorporated area, so it doesn't have any city jurisdiction or use. But we knew that we didn't have to look at city use records, because the majority of the cities in Sonoma County now have policies banning the use of synthetic pesticides in public spaces, as does the county of Sonoma. And so the 5th district supervisor was instrumental in supporting that initiative and policy change to go through. So now that our county parks and trail systems are no longer being sprayed with synthetic pesticides. We also inquired with Linda and the 5th district to support us in our efforts to get Caltrans to stop spraying in our community as well, and have their pledge support with that. But we need more community members to be able to engage our elected leaders, so that it comes from not just SASS or GAS, but from our communities in general, to be, and not just Linda Hopkins. We need other supervisors to be able to support this initiative as well. We've had great support from Linda. We've also had great support from Chris Corsi. It would be great if we had community members in the other districts to be able to put pressure on their supervisors as well. I think that would really help the movement a lot. So I'm definitely hearing, yes, move forward with advocating for the NOIs, trying to get us to be a pilot, if not all of Sonoma County, at least Graton to pilot it.
And I'm not sure if you explained the term NOI yet, Nicole. So can I just spend a second on that?
I love that. Thanks, Jane.
Yeah. There's one subset of that over 1,000 registered pesticides in California that are known as restricted material pesticides. They're given restricted status because they're more hazardous or more drift prone. Problematic pesticides, growers need to apply for an annual permit before they can use restricted material pesticides. And then once they have a permit, an annual permit, each time they use that pesticide, they have to submit a notice of intent to the agricultural commissioner. I forget how many hours, 24 hours, let's say, before they apply. That's an NOI, or notice of intent. So that really is the only existing advance notice that anyone gets. Agricultural commissioners could absolutely make those NOIs public. They do not. But the only advance notice that anyone gets is for this small set of about 40 restricted material pesticides, the worst of the worst, a little bit before applications, and that notice goes to the ag commissioners. So when Nicole talks about an NOI campaign, that would be a campaign to pressure the ag commissioner to make those public, which is well within his jurisdiction to do, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jane. I appreciate you clarifying like that too. I know in regards to the data found from this research, our county ag commissioner responded that because none of the chemicals found were on that restricted list of chemical use, an NOI wouldn't serve us in the context of this study. So I think that how we define the NOI's process and what we would like notification of, I think because the restricted chemicals have to be reported before they're sprayed, there's less changing of the systems that need to happen. They already have the information before those chemicals are being sprayed. So it's just a matter of making that information transparent. In the case of making Graton a pilot, we could request that we investigate a different way of approaching the notice of intent to sprays that would include all pesticides, which for a period of time, one of our local vineyards was doing for their local residents, was letting them know what they were spraying in advance so that they could take steps, but it was hit and miss. And I think that is sort of emblematic of what happens when we build good relationships with our community and our farmers, and we receive that intelligence, but because it's not codified, because it doesn't become policy, there's no way to ensure that there is notification happening or that it's happening on a consistent and regular basis, which is the benefit of being able to do that here. Any other thoughts on that before we transition to my second question? Okay, my second question is there a need for us to do a continued research study here in Graton? Is there desire amongst our community members to expand the study in some capacity and apply for another grant from California Breast Cancer Research Program? Yeah, Ron.
I'd like to see another study after we've just had 3 months of rain. Because that whatever chemicals are there are going to really leach into the ground. And, you know, like we're on a well, albeit it's 300 feet deep, but it could leach down into there. So I see value in stepping this up, moving forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts about continuing the study? Yes.
I'd like to say I've been in Graton for 70 years and I live across from Oak Grove School. And so the apples, there's 30 acres of apples behind our house. And usually around 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, in April or so, they will spray and all the kids get brought to school and all that stuff is out in the air. And just seems wrong.
Yeah. Thanks for naming that. I think many of the families and the students and the educators who are in those schools express similar concerns. And, you know, when a fifth grader can say this doesn't make sense, and then as an adult, we can say this doesn't make sense, I think we're onto something there. Yeah, I'm saying a yes to doing a larger study and including the school.
And there are now, there's limited restrictions in place now around all public schools and daycares in California between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on school days. That the most drift-prone methods, at least of pesticides, are now prohibited during those hours, and that's the result of a long-term fight that our coalition embarked on, and that's been in place since 2018. That buffer zone is just 1/4 mile. That's not enough. You know, we know that pesticides drift for more than a mile.
Yeah. Thanks, Jane. And we know that even with that buffer zone in place, Californians for Pesticide Reform had done some ground truthing And we learned that even though there is that restriction in place, that there are local farmers who are not abiding by those restrictions and are spraying in the times when they are not allowed to be spraying. Yeah. All right, community, we're at 7. I want to thank you so much for showing up and showing up and showing up. You are the reason why we as researchers keep showing up as well. It's very gratifying to be able to meet with all of you and share these results after the many years of studying what's going on. This doesn't conclude anything by means. Please continue to reach out if you have further questions or you have an aha, an idea, you have some brilliant thing. You know, I loved what Peggy said about this being sort of a baby step. And I am reminded that baby steps don't happen with trepidation. Baby steps happen full and willful and embodied. And sometimes we trip and sometimes we learn things along the way. But if we can keep taking baby steps in this way as a community, I think we're going to find our way. I want to yield and let my fellow researchers give some closing words if they're so called.
Hard to top that. I just want to say there's some great ideas that have popped up in the chat. This has been a lovely discussion, and I think you have a really dynamic community there to bring together in some very productive ways, and I think that's exciting. So thank you all.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, just agreed. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you, everyone. Special thanks to our research team. Thank you for showing up for us. Thank you, community. We appreciate you.